Yes, so welcome everyone to the 2024 People's Social Impact Conference. I'm your host, Ryan Knight, one of the co-founders of the Afro-Caribbean Business Network and board member of SETSI, the social economy through social inclusion. Today, we have a great guest giving us insights through a keynote, Paul Taylor. And Paul Taylor, longtime activist, nonprofit leader, educator, media commentator, and co-founder of Evenings and Weekends Consulting. I'm a big fan. I'm looking forward to his insights. Please join me in welcoming Paul Taylor. Need like a clap soundtrack.
No need. Thank you so much, Ryan. I really appreciate that introduction. And hello, Victor, and friends. Good morning and hello. It is, I would say it's a real honor to join you this morning. From my sense of what you're going to be doing over the entirety of the People's Social Impact Conference, sounds like it's going to be some really worthwhile capacity strengthening activities. So really excited to be joining you here this morning.
I really appreciate it. And just before you get in, we always love to begin all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Appreciate that. And again, we're looking forward to your insights on the stage of social inclusion today and going into the future. The floor is yours, Paul.
Awesome. Thank you again, Ryan, and I really appreciate the acknowledgement. As part of my remarks this morning, I wanted to share some thoughts and reflections on what I see as, critical elements of our journey towards our collective liberation. And so I sat at my laptop and started thinking about what I would share. And it was one of those mornings, maybe you've had one of these mornings. As I reflected on what I would share today, I heard Bob Marley's beautiful poetic lyricism in my ears, and for me at least, it's a good day when that happens. And I kept hearing, none but ourselves can free our minds. I kept hearing that line over and over in my head. And I love Redemption Song. And for me, it's not only one of my favorites, but I find it to be an incredibly grounding and a powerful reminder of the work that remains. Because, for many of us, our ancestors fought for, the liberation of their bodies and the bodies of those that came after them. And I'm certainly, beyond grateful and forever indebted. The world would be, we know this, but the world would be very different if not for their leadership, their determination, their love, and their willingness to dream of something different, something better. With that said, I also realize that in many ways, many of our minds remain captured and enslaved by notions that vociferously challenge our liberation, whether it's colonialism, patriarchy, white supremacy, ableism, homophobia, and all of the other wicked shit that is so deeply embedded, I think, in far too many places. Those that benefit the most from these oppressive organizing principles, I think, have worked insidiously to deeply embed those principles in the systems, in the institutions, in the policies that we navigate. And the worst part is, I think, is that they've convinced many of us that that's just the way that it is. So I think emancipation from this mental slavery is our work, it's your work, it's my work, and most importantly, I think it's possible. I really believe it. We don't have to do things the way that others have convinced us that they should be done. I'm going to start redesigning right away, right now, and pushing back on doing it the way that others do it. So actually, I'm going to start my remarks again, believe it or not, and I'm going to try this slightly differently. Good morning again. My name is Paul Taylor, and I'm proud to come from a line of incredibly brilliant and gifted Black women. I'm the son of Bernadine Naomi Taylor. I'm the grandson of Maisie Olivia Baker, and I'm the great-grandson of Rebecca Thompson. And I mention these women to you because they're important to me and they're a huge part of who I am. And I am forever indebted to the Black women that came before me. And I think it's important, I acknowledge them because I think it's important for us to never forget that our bios, our stories that we share of ourselves, those don't begin with our first job after post-secondary education. The way that we've been taught to think about our stories has been overly informed, if not co-opted, I think, by capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, and ableism. And I would argue that, it's a part of the mental slavery that we need to reject and rebuke. I believe that our stories begin with those that came before us. I derive a great sense of strength from recognizing that, my story begins with, and all of our stories begin with those that fight for us even before they know we exist. It begins with those that nurture us, those that teach us, that love us, that protect us. And in my experience, it's often the women in our families. I'm standing on their shoulders today, and I'm standing on their shoulders every day. They're the beginning of my story. They're why I'm here. So again, I think it's really important to reflect on the bios and stories of ourselves that we create and that we share, and even how we think about ourselves and the role that those who came before us have played in making space for us and shaping who we are today. So I want to seize every opportunity that I can to acknowledge, thank, and say the names of my mom, Bernadine, my grandmother, Maisie, and my great-grandmother, Rebecca. I'm going to do it again because I feel like their names don't get said enough. And when I'm feeling deflated, defeated, they're also who I channel and whose strength and teachings continue to inspire, support, and guide me on my journey, be it as a leader, a neighbor, a friend, a partner, or a colleague. So I'd like you maybe to take just a brief moment to individually reflect on, we'll do this privately, but just reflect on and acknowledge, whose shoulders you're standing on, or who made it possible for you to stand tall today. And I think especially important to acknowledge the women that have done this work. Let's just pause for a moment and reflect and acknowledge the folks for whom we're made it possible for us to be here today. Thank you. And I thank them also, the folks that you were all acknowledging. My mother Bernadine taught me to be curious. She taught me to ask questions, and she taught me to dream in color and to push back on the low expectations that others have of me. And this goes back to being a young Black boy growing up in Toronto. To push back on those low expectations that are routinely bestowed upon Black boys. She taught me, and in fact, she continues to teach me, that it's my responsibility to do everything that I can to help make my communities and the world a more just, fair, and kind place. If she were here with us this morning, I'm sure, I have no doubt, she would say that is everybody's work. That's all of our work. She also taught me something that I don't ever really learn elsewhere. I think many of us, we don't ever really learn this elsewhere. I certainly didn't learn it at a university or in most workplaces. She taught me about the importance of prioritizing things like joy, play, and rest, which I've come to realize is crucially important and something that we should never feel guilty about. Many of us spend our lives fighting against these oppressive and unjust systems, or the effects and harms that they cause. And we do that because, of course, we see the harm that they inflict every day. But if you ask me, which I think you are by inviting me here today, too many of us fight those systems or try our best to navigate their effects without making it a priority to center our need for rest, play, and joy. I try to remember, that many of our ancestors fought what to many seemed like impossible battles for their liberation, for our liberation. And like many of you, I'm sure, I will always feel compelled to continue to push for better, including fighting for our collective liberation. Because I take, being passed the baton from my ancestors, I take that very seriously. But I also recognize that many of their sacrifices were so that I could be able to enjoy rest, peace, good food, laughter, love, dancing, and everything else that brings me joy. And it's why in my career, I guess, as a nonprofit leader, and even now as a consultant, I try to push back on what I believe are really harmful notions of the joyless, burnt out, always working leader that never seems to have the time to prioritize their own needs, let alone joy, play, and rest. Well, you want to know, I'm happy to share a couple secrets. I'm 42 years old and I still play outside with my friends. I go for massages. In fact, I have two masseuses, one on either end of the city. They're both very popular, and when one is busy, I book with the other, I haven't built up the courage yet to tell them both that I have two masseuses, but I'm working on it. But either way, it's one of the ways that I center these things that I think are really, really important and that we should acknowledge, we should lead into. So I'd encourage you all to think about what it could look like to further center joy and rest in the work that you do. What it looks like when we push back on urgency culture and all of this racing around, and more racing around that I think does nothing more than keep us busy and act as a distraction from challenging the very systems that keep us perpetually in motion, going from one thing to the next to the next. Urgency culture is not our friend, and it never will be. And most importantly, though, like much of this, it doesn't have to be this way. Earlier, I mentioned my grandmother, Maisie Olivia Baker Burt, but I'd like to introduce you to her and why she's so important to me. She taught me about what it means to lead. She died over 30 years ago, but I remember going to her funeral in St. Kitts when she died, and she was a real leader in her community. She inspires me and she inspires many others, through her commitment to community. She taught me about the responsibilities that I have to my communities. And, my grandmother, Maisie, like her mother before her, didn't have a lot. She was materially poor. She raised her three girls, so my mom and her sisters, and several others, while her husband worked low-wage jobs on the tiny island country that they spent most of their lives on, St. Kitts and Nevis. Although my grandmother didn't have much, she always managed. She had this incredible gift. She managed to make something delicious with what she had. It's like those pots that she had were magical. And unsurprisingly, it's often how I cook to this day. I still use what I see in the fridge or cupboard to inspire my meals. I feel like I've learned to channel my grandmother's magical pots and her commitment to community. Because one of the things that was really fundamental to her is that she believed that no one should go hungry, especially the children and youth in her community. So she would take the little that she had and throw it into those magical pots and create something that would feed countless neighborhood children and sometimes even their parents. It's not lost on me that my grandmother wasn't funded, she wasn't paid, nor was she backed by any organization or any level of government. She just did what she knew was needed, because that's what it means to have a commitment to your community. You help care for those that have been made to struggle the most. And I say made to struggle the most, made more vulnerable, because no one comes out of the womb, vulnerable. There are systems that make us vulnerable. I think about the Black women who came before me, and they are among countless Black women and their families who are forced to navigate the most unjust and unfair systems, and to do so with the least amount of material support, the least amount of material resources. But despite this, they've demonstrated mutual aid and community care far before it was ever called mutual aid. Again, it's just what they did, what they had to do to survive. When my mother had an extra $20, I was often the one walking with the envelope to drop it off at one of her friends' places. Or sometimes I would even go to the grocery store to pick up a few things that my mother knew that her friend deserved. And when we were struggling with empty cupboards ourselves, no electricity, no hot water or heat, that magical $20 from one of my mom's friends found its way back to us. I personally witnessed and benefited from the mutual aid practiced by Black women that kept many of us alive. To me, again, that's what community is about. So I've taken these, I think very important lessons with me to every single job that I've ever had. When I was the executive director of an organization called FoodShare Toronto, it was my commitment to community that I had learned from my grandmother that inspired me to do everything that I could to raise the incomes for those at the bottom of FoodShare's pay grid. But we all know are so likely to Black and brown and often win, because this is true in just about every sector. We were able to raise wage from $12 an hour over the 6 years I was there to $4 an hour. Also brought forward a policy that tied the lowest wage in the organization to the highest wage. So it was based on a ratio of 1 to 3, which meant the executive director, me at the time, could not be paid more than 3 times what the lowest paid person in the organization was paid. I've brought that same, this in the way I think about this, I've thought about this policies. It's not just something for the nonprofit sector. I've brought the same policy to my consulting firm with the same ratio, 1 to 3 ratio. We also introduced policies that have us paying people $100 for employment interviews, And not only do we provide benefits to our team, but we start those benefits on day one of someone's employment. Why would we? It behooves me that we've let ourselves be convinced that it's appropriate to say to somebody who may be dependent on life-saving medication, you wait 3 months until we decide whether or not we dig you, and then we can support you to access that medication. We have let that. We have allowed that. We have allowed the normalization of that type of approach. But again, like everything, it doesn't have to be that way. At the firm that I started, we have a strict 9 to 5 policy, which includes no email sent after 5 p.m., before 9 a.m., and over the lunch hour. We truly take time off. We have an hour off at lunch where emails aren't sent, no meetings are scheduled, so that we can all unplug, step away from our work. We even celebrate each other's lunchtime creations in our Slack channel. We have a food Slack channel on our team Slack where it's just folks posting the food that they're making and enjoying for lunch. But we also recognize, it sounds like a nice thing to do, in terms of work-life balance. And yes, that's important. But the impact on gender justice of a 9 to 5, a strict 9 to 5 working policy after work, they're the ones, often men, who are more, it's easier for them to respond to the boss's email after work. So then what ends up happening is our work gets seen. I'm sure I've benefited from this. Our work gets seen more. We're seen as working harder, while those that are providing the on top of often a full workday, providing care for children, don't have those opportunities as a result of the care that they're providing. The care that, as I've described, is so important. So from a gender justice perspective, this is really important to us. Also, instead of sick days at our firm, we've introduced wellness days. So folks can use the time to do the things that keep them well. Play outside with their friends, sit in the sun, cook, relax, or even spend a day catching up on Survivor or Love Island or whatever it is. Just saying. These policies didn't come from a book. I'm also grounded in this. And again, I take a moment to always acknowledge that these policies didn't come from a book or a lesson at a university or college. These lessons were taught to me by brilliant and loving Black women in my family and in many families. And while these women often go uncelebrated, unrecognized, and certainly not paid what they deserve, they do so much heavy lifting in our communities, in all of our communities. I am grateful, and today I celebrate and honor them, and we should all honor them, and not just in words. We need to do things differently. In fact, I think we're going to do things differently, and we're going to do all that we can to make sure that those who have been made to struggle the most are able to not just survive. It's not enough to just hope for people who have been made to struggle to survive and to have food. We want to thrive. We want everyone to thrive and be able to play outside with their friends, be able to access joy and rest. I think we're also going to push through doors that our ancestors fought to unlock, and we're going to leave them wide open for those that come after us, because to me, that's what it means to lead. I believe that justice, liberation, rest, and even joy for us all is within our reach. My mother raised an optimist. It's both a blessing and a curse, but today with all of you, it really feels like a blessing in this space. So I say today, let's commit to making our ancestors proud by doing all that we can with the baton that they've passed us and the teachings that they've shared and the love and support that they've provided, because I think together, holding that baton, we will carry it farther than any one of us could. And I know folks on this call know this far better than I, but ways that Black women in particular are excluded from leadership opportunities. Even when they're in those leadership opportunities, face a great deal of hostility. So we've got to think about how we combat those systems that exclude them, and how we combat the harm that they face in so many of these leadership spaces.
Absolutely, and really appreciate that perspective. And for those that are joining us, remember, we have a full day of content and interviews and conversations. So we'll end this keynote as the way we began. So we'd like to close by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and live together for our collective liberation and sovereignty.